Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. In today's troubled economic times, or at least so it's broadcast to us and plastered all over newspapers and magazines across the country, we're led to believe that probably not only are we in hard times, but, well, it's going to take another presidential election and perhaps a lot of hope that a lot of us will actually pull out of it so that we no longer struggle. Well, joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program, for many of you listeners who have been with us for quite a long time, we don't believe in problems because with every problem, obviously, there's a solution. And today we want to present just that in a very unique way. The book is simply titled The $100 Startup, Reinvent the Way You Make a Living and Do What You Love and Create a New Future. And on our program, I'd like to welcome our guest, Mr. Chris Kulabau. Chris, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Hey, Daniel, thanks so much for having me. It's a big honor.
Now, being that I broadcast and I live in the Portland, Oregon area, for many people who have lived in the area and also have been through Portland, Oregon, at Powell's Books, I noticed that your book is now at number 1. You must have something that's really pulling people toward you.
Well, that's great. I love Powell's as well. Of course, I'm honored that people are enjoying it. You know, hopefully it's not so much about me, but it's about the message of the book and the opportunity that people have to kind of create their own freedom and make something for themselves instead of waiting for that political solution, as you mentioned, instead of waiting for the world to kind of, you know, get better around them, but actually taking responsibility for themselves. Hopefully people are enjoying that.
Yeah, and the beauty, too, Chris, is there are a ton of books out there on business. And what I really enjoy about the $100 Startup is sort of the potpourri that you pull together. So what happens as the reader goes through this is, A, you become inspired because you see that it's possible. And the second thing is you really become knowing that it's possible because you start feeling that inner voice of your own ideas beginning to stir. Now talk first about how in the $100 Startup, because you feature a lot of people who started, you know, with very little to, in some cases, no working capital money whatsoever. And talk about your criteria in putting this book together, what you were looking for.
You know, I like that word potpourri. I wanted to provide a lot of different stories. I didn't want to just tell my story or the story of one or two other people. I wanted to look at people from all walks of life, from many different countries, people from all ages, you know, who had all done this, who had all started the business without spending a lot of money. So initially it was quite broad, but then we also had some specific characteristics that you had to meet to be in the study. And one of those characteristics was your business has to make at least $50,000 a year or more in net income. And we talked to people who had multiple six-figure incomes as well as a few people who had million-dollar incomes. But my focus was, you know, at least it's going to be $50,000 a year or more because that's, you know, the average income in America right now. Then you also had to be willing to share all the details about your business, including the finances. You had to be willing to talk about how much it costs to start up and what went well along the way and how much revenue came in each year. And for the most part, you had to operate the business using no special skills, or at least no highly technical skills, nothing that you'd have to go back to university for, nothing that you'd have to go and get a business degree for. So mostly I'm just looking for ordinary people, you know, again, from all walks of life who are successfully able to, you know, create this freedom for themselves by doing something that they love and then creating a business model around it.
Now, I think what's really neat as you read the $100 Startup about what you're talking about here is, you know, first of all, you talk about simplicity, that you didn't really have to have a special skill set. And in some cases, these people sort of, if you will, accidentally came across the idea that they actually put into motion to become successful. But the biggest thing that you say throughout the book that's very consistent, and I think why a lot of people, I guess, fail when it comes to wanting to become an entrepreneur, start their own businesses, they simply just don't get started.
Mm. Yeah, I really feel like, you know, everybody has a business idea. If you talk to people, you know, even talk to people on the street, most people have some idea for some kind of business, but they don't understand what's involved, you know, with starting it. They think that there's a lot of steps. They think that they have to write a business plan. You know, they have to spend months, you know, writing something that no one else is ever going to read. They think they have to beg for money in some way. Mm-hmm. You know, they think they have to go to the bank or whatever. But, you know, what we're trying to do is simplify. So, yes, the people who are successful are the ones that essentially said, okay, how can we boil this down to the bare essentials? What actually is a business? It's just a product or a service. It's a group of people willing to pay for it and a means of getting paid. And so a lot of those people, as you said, some of them accidentally, a lot of them unexpectedly, they started this business usually within, less than a month or two, and then, just put it out there without a lot of risk, without a lot of investment, and then saw how people responded. And that, to me, is really the key to success. So I always say, action beats planning. Planning is okay, but it must be coupled with action.
Now, if I remember reading right, you were saying that the average, I guess, median startup was about $125?
Yeah, something like that. I mean, we looked at 1,500 businesses, and there was a range of startup costs, but the vast majority are under $1,000, and a lot of them under $100.
Now, talk about, let's say, 3 types of businesses that were created out of your book. And I mean, I read a bunch of them, so for me it's kind of where do you start in sharing the story, but I'll kind of let you take it from there. Because like I said, you didn't really need to have a whole lot of technical skill. You don't need to have a huge education. I mean, there are a lot of these myths, as you had just mentioned, that kind of get people stymied to a point of being petrified, of even getting started. Again, the key that you say throughout your book is, and through everybody that you profiled, get started. Just get going.
Right. Yeah, of course.
It's easier than you think.
Okay, so you want 3 different stories. Let's see what we can do here. First story, I picked someone from Portland, Oregon, actually. This is a story of Michael Henna, and Michael was a media sales professional. He was middle-aged with a family, and he'd always had a fairly traditional career. And then, unfortunately, one day he was laid off, from this job unexpectedly. And it's kind of a long story because Michael first thought he was going to get another job, and he did all the things he was supposed to do. He sent out his resume, and he contacted his colleagues and all this, but he realized with the economy there wasn't a lot of jobs to be had, and his industry was in a decline. So Michael ended up opening a retail store. He opened a store called Mattress Lot, which is in Northeast Portland. And Michael didn't know anything about mattress stores, before he did this. But that almost worked to his advantage because he decided to create a family-friendly environment. It's like a play area for kids. And then he started the world's first mattress delivery by bicycle service, which is now delivering mattresses throughout Portland, which of course goes over very well in the city. And it's also, you can go on YouTube and see clips of this. So the funny thing about Michael is, he obviously had no expectation when he was working that regular job that he was going to become an entrepreneur and open this business. But 2 years in, it's now a $1 million a year business. And Michael talks about the role that this business plays in the community and how much he enjoys having his family involved and serving other families in the community. And he also said something to me that I thought was inspiring and interesting. He said, that time when I got laid off, it really was a shock. It was a bad day, but it turned into the best thing that ever happened to me. So I'm glad that took place. So that's my first story of someone who kind of went through a transition, unexpectedly, but then ended up, finding something that he actually enjoyed more.
I know, and it's interesting, too, as you share that story that, we hear so much, as I was mentioning earlier in the program, about how bad the economy is, and it seems that we hear more of it, especially as we're about to elect or re-elect a president, for instance. It's about the economy. But the truth is, I got to tell you, Chris, even back before President Barack Obama was elected, and George W. Bush was going out and saying, we need all this money, we're in the worst, or approaching the worst catastrophic time since the Great Depression, I have looked around me, and I have talked with people who are in businesses. Some of them are small, and some of them are large, and I've got to tell you, over the last 4 years, sure, there are those stories out there that aren't so good, but I've heard a lot more successes than I've heard failures. And it seems to me like you've kind of ran into the same thing.
Well, whenever there is an economic decline, whenever there's, an economic downturn, that it presents a lot of different things. I mean, it does present a number of challenges, and there's certainly some negative things about it, but it also presents opportunity, also presents possibility. One, because a lot of people are just thinking differently. And a lot of people are thinking, okay, maybe I've always looked to, some employer to meet my needs before, or to the government or whatever, but I'm not going to be able to do that now. And so it's a little bit scary at first, then it's quite positive as people kind of take matters into their own hands. And then just practically, historically, there's a lot of businesses that have been started during a recession or a depression or a downcline. Federal Express, General Electric, Microsoft, a lot of really big American companies came out of negative economic news. So I always encourage people, it's not so much about looking on the bright side as it is just, taking advantage of opportunities that are out there and thinking differently about risk and thinking about where security really is.
And that's what you talk also consistently about your book, is that usually a business idea, because that's what a lot of people say, where do you get the ideas, or how do you do this, so forth and so on, usually occurs from maybe a dissatisfaction of a service that somebody is using, maybe a lack of a product that somebody needs to use. I mean, they're right there in front of you. I mean, opportunities everywhere.
Exactly. It just takes a different kind of thinking about it.
Right.
It just takes a matter of being, observant and noticing. Like you mentioned, when there's a gap somewhere, you mentioned like an inefficiency. If you as you buy products or as you shop, as you do different things, if you find yourself dissatisfied, you feel like someone's not providing good service, or there's something out there that you would like to have, but it's not out there, then maybe you're not the only one. There's a lot of stories of people who kind of followed that path.
Now, I remember that you were talking about a story, just, it's kind of a little bit off the beaten path. It was about someone who started creating, I guess, specialty maps. And this also goes in line with, the first goal is to get that first paycheck, or that first payday. And I think that's so important, because I was just talking with a gentleman not too long ago. I was sitting in a Target waiting for my wife to kind of browse around, and he happened to be an employee wheeling around in a wheelchair, and he said that he was a teacher, with a disability, who actually found himself, he's working at Target, but saying one of the things that he likes to do is that he likes to tutor to help people with special needs. And I said, so, how's that working out for you? He says, well, I spend a lot of hours, and, I don't make any money. I kind of give my time. And I said, well, why don't you charge people to do this? And you hear that consistently when people start a business, is they seem to feel that it's kind of hard to ask for the sale, but you say that should be your first goal, because it makes you experience the fact that it's really possible that you can make money in your business.
No, absolutely, and it's so empowering to get that first sale. We talk to people over and over, and they always said that the feeling, that the affirmation that they received from that first sale, was worth far more than the actual monetary amount. We talked to people who made $50 on their first sale, and they just talked about how that was huge for them, because it showed them, that they could make their own. They could create something, some kind of product or service that has value, and a stranger could come along and purchase it or sign up for it. And that really kind of led to a lot of possibilities later. So yes, the sooner the better, and you can get that sale. And as for asking for money, we are asked for money every day when we go out, and if we go out to any store or restaurant, or if we ride the bus, or if we take a cab, if we travel anywhere, like there's, companies have no problem asking for money, and it's not a big deal. For individuals to do the same. I mean, I think people will actually respect you more if you're a tutor who charges as opposed to a tutor who does it for free.
And it's really funny on that particular note, because a lot of times if you just simply, say what it is that you're going to do, and you say, and for that it'll cost you this, generally people are going to go, okay, here you go.
Exactly. Well, when you present the benefit, that's the key. If you say, here's what I'm going to do for you, and this is the cost. People will make if we go through in our heads, we make a pretty sophisticated analysis whenever we're presented with a price, even if it's at Starbucks or something, and we often will determine that that's well worth it. If you're going to tutor me and teach me something I didn't know, and I'm going to be able to apply that knowledge, to something that's going to help me later, that certainly has value.
Now, you actually gave a really interesting example of a couple who eventually found themselves living in South America, and as you said, the idea crashed into them, something to do with wedding photography, and that they're pretty much flown around, or people from around the world enlisting their services, and they originally had that attitude with, well, there are photographers everywhere that are doing this. Why would anyone pay us? Go ahead and share that story and how that all came about.
Right. Their story, I think her name was Brooke. I believe they live in Chile. Their story is one of specialization and of referral. So a lot of services businesses, probably the majority of service businesses, they don't grow through advertising. They don't grow through any traditional marketing. They grow entirely based on providing a good service and then having people talk about it. So in their case, they are doing wedding photography, but for the most part, they're doing I don't know if I want to call it unconventional. They have their own artistic slant on what they do, and they've really kind of built a portfolio and a platform. And they have used social media well, which a lot of our case studies did, but not all of them. In their case, they definitely had, a network on Facebook and Twitter and people kind of keeping up with their work. And so then from there, they're able to kind of build a waiting list. And they kind of market themselves as exclusive, and it is like, it's the kind of thing where there's wedding photographers everywhere. But, if you're going to have a wedding, people have a wedding once in their lives, or maybe twice, but hopefully not more than that. And it's a huge thing, and so you're willing to invest in it. And a lot of the brides that they work for, they're willing to fly her around the world because this is an important, milestone in their lives.
Mm-hmm. Now, you hit on also another big thing that people really need to consider that's really changing in the landscape of how people promote their businesses, and that's marketing and advertising. And unless you're a large company that has the money to do, for instance, like, say, what a Comcast does, or, any slew of these companies that can throw, for instance, a billboard on a Indy 500 car, for instance,
right.
The small guy really gets out there and they spend their money with a hope of return. But really there are a lot of ways that you can go about this where you don't really have to spend advertising dollars, or if you do, you can combine that with hustle, but make sure that your advertising is spent sort of specifically. Kind of clear that myth up for people about advertising in the landscape of today.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, not only being able to spend advertising money is not necessarily a benefit, because a lot of those companies like Comcast and whatever, a lot of them are spending money that they don't actually track, and they don't know that it actually really helps their business. So, excuse me, but by far most of the businesses that we looked at, they grew their business through what I call hustling, which is essentially connecting with people and building on this referral basis. And there's different ways of doing that. Some of them focused, clearly on, providing value to their service and then asking for referrals. Others did kind of build up a website and some social media following. Others focused on, local means of getting the word out with free press or, weekly newspapers and magazines. But I would say, out of 1,500 case studies that we looked at, probably at least 1,000 of them did absolutely no traditional advertising of any kind. And I often heard over and over from someone who said, well, we thought advertising was going to be good, so we tried it, but then we didn't really see much of a return, and we realized, we're actually, getting better results just by communicating, with our customers and prospects and building a following that way.
I think that's important, too, Chris, for our listeners to understand, because there's no doubt that as you start a business, especially when you get your business started and you decide to build a website, there are a slew of people out there that are more than willing to sell you the tools, that give you the feeling that they're guaranteed to work. Search engine optimization is one we've heard a lot of. Right. And believe me, you want to go ahead and spend the money, but I can promise you one thing, they can't guarantee any more than anybody else.
Right, exactly. So that's why it comes back to value, and a lot of those things are not actually valuable. So I would always counsel people not to spend their money in that way.
Now, go ahead if you can and suggest, okay, so you've started your business, and it could be anything, but so you start a website. One of the things you want to do is you want to get traffic. Now, you give some suggestions on how you can start building that.
The suggestions that I started, it depends on the kind of business you have, but I always recommend you start with the people that you know. And sometimes people say, well, I don't know anyone. This is a new venture. I'm not really connected, but I really think everyone is connected, one way or another.
Oh, yeah.
So, I always, when I started my project, I thought I didn't know anyone, and I wanted to be a writer, but, who am I? Nobody knows who I am. But I thought, okay, well, there's people I went to school with, I was fortunate to work overseas in Africa for about 4 years, so I thought I have colleagues from there. There's people I know, just other friends, people in my family. So I just wrote to everybody, and I sent individual messages, and I'm not spamming anyone, I'm not blasting anyone, but just kind of saying, hey, I'm doing this project, and if you'd like to support it, here are a couple of ways you can do it, very specific things. And if you don't want to hear from me again, no problem, you never will. But, starting with who you know is really powerful, because then it kind of allows you to build organically. If you know 5 people, that's great. And 25, then 100. When you get that first customer, you treat that customer like the most important person in the world, because they are. They're giving you their business. And I just saw so many businesses that grew that way, as opposed to any kind of massive launch. And then later on, we look at product launches once you have a foundation. But I think the foundation is more important.
Now, Chris, one of the things I know people really struggle with is the idea of how to price their product or service. You know, how much money should be charged. And one of the first things a person will usually tend to do is they'll think the idea is to go inexpensively or affordably, which is fine. But I can tell you, and I know that you actually talk about this in your book too, about the customer isn't always right. But the fact is, you can have a customer who spends $10 on something, and you can spend or have a customer who spends $100 on something, and guaranteed you will spend more time and sweat on the $10 customer than you will the $100 customer. Talk about that a little bit about price, because believe me, I've experienced this, and it's get rid of those little guys; they're just a hassle.
I think many of us have experienced that. It's just as you say. I mentioned respect earlier. You know, if people purchase something for a low price, they don't necessarily, respect the person that's providing that. I'm a big fan of pricing based on value and thinking about, okay, how am I actually going to change this person's life? And that's going to hopefully, if I'm creating something that's genuinely useful, it's really going to make a difference in their life. It's going to make a significant difference. So I might not charge them, the full amount of that, but it's not going to be $10 or whatever. I really feel like, building a business, you have to create, premium value, but then you should charge, if not premium prices, at least, fair prices. So it's also hard, to build a business on $10 customers. It's much easier to build a business on customers paying much more of a fair price.
It's so fascinating because, I've heard that constantly, even in relation to what we do. It's like, should we offer this or offer that, that really reduces, if not nothing more, gives away something for free. Now, giving away, like, for instance, you talked about how you got to a point where you were sort of consulting, but you found you didn't really like doing that very much.
Yeah,
much less actually, getting money for it.
Right.
And you had a good reason, and I thought it was very viable because a lot of times when you give the consulting, like in your case, you were I just really like helping people out. That really returns to you more than if you just ask for the dollar amount right off the top, so to speak.
Yes, absolutely. So in my case, I tried the consulting, and I just didn't feel I was good at it. I felt like there was some kind of disconnect. I enjoyed helping people. I enjoyed talking to them, and if there's something I could do to help their problem, I liked doing it. But I just didn't like doing it for money. And so I just kind of took that out of the equation, and I just started helping people. Even now, I probably do 80% of my work for free. I think a key point, though, is, I do 80% of my work for free, but I do have the other 20%, right? Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't want to just, I wouldn't want to do 100% of my work for free because then I would never get paid. But, because I really enjoy what I do, I can help people, and speak and write books and all that kind of stuff, but without receiving a direct payment. But then because I have the other, thing there, then it all works out. So I wouldn't encourage anyone to do everything for free, but I would encourage them to focus on, okay, what can you do for free and what is paid and how do you kind of create this kind of model that works together?
I find it amazing, as you were talking about at that point in the book, as I just remember being at a sort of a community business meeting, and we each would kind of give a little bit of a spiel about something, and I just simply brought up, how often do many of us actually listen? A lot of times, especially as you start a business, you're out there listening, but what you're listening for is somebody who really has a need or a desire for what it is that you have to offer, because that's what you're in business for. But I said, but when I talked about listening, how many times do you listen and actually offer a solution to a problem that may have nothing to do with your business whatsoever? And I always found the beauty in that is you become a resource people come back to because you become trusted. That's a big key element, especially what you talk about at the $100 startup.
It's essentially about establishing perceived authority. It's about, becoming the expert in a specific thing, no matter how small it is. I mean, a lot of people that we talked with, they were experts on very kind of specific things that you wouldn't even imagine someone could build a business out of, like frequent flyer miles or something,
right.
Or, traveling the world and learning.
Or yarn, for that matter.
Yarn, exactly, yes. Well, my wife is a knitter, so she would probably say yarn is a big thing. But, yes, so becoming that perceived authority, creating that platform of trust, and then it's like, whenever I have a question about whatever it is, I don't have many questions about yarn, but if I did, I would know who to go to. And then the other thing is that authority kind of translates itself. So it's like once you're an authority in one field, it's somewhat easy to kind of make that jump because you are a trusted, respected person. So it is a long-term building process.
Now, did you find, Chris, as you put together the $100 startup, that because this is sort of what came up for me as I was reading the various stories and the different segments of the book that talk about things for people to consider as, first of all, you take action, but then, of course, you adjust your course along the way. You're doing, business inventory, for instance, to find out so you can make adjustments or improve on your business and the like. But mostly it seemed people were getting back to, going with their gut feelings and their instincts, just kind of beginning to actually trust themselves to just try.
Mm-hmm. We looked at a lot of different things. I guess some people were very data-driven, and some people really were, interested in testing and tracking and all that kind of stuff. I myself am not really oriented that way. Mm-hmm. So I also found a lot of other people who were like me, and they did just try. They did just kind of, put things out there and adjust based on demand and response. And then the fun thing is when you're not taking a lot of risk, you can do that. When you're not spending a lot of money, you're not, waiting months to see, or months or years even, to see whether this idea is going to be proven or not, then you can do that.
Fascinating stuff. Now, I know you only have 30 minutes with us, so I'd like you, Chris, if you could, to go ahead and give out your website where they can find out more about the book. And I know that you've got a lot of good, exciting stuff on your website as well for people to use as a reference.
Yes, well, fine. Thanks again for having me. The website for the book is 100startup.com, so it's 100startup.com. The book should be at any bookstore or on Amazon.com. And then my website is chrisguillebeau.com, which no one can ever spell. But if you just type in $100 Startup or Chris Guillebeau, something that sounds like that, to Google, you'll find me.
Very good. Great book, like I said. It'll definitely inspire people not only to move forward, with an idea, but to also realize that it's possible that you can not only reinvent yourself, but create a lifestyle that you've always dreamed of. And Chris, I'd like to thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Oh, thank you so much. It was great questions. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Daniel.
You bet. Again, the book is The $100 Startup, folks, so get out there, get a copy, or go to 100startup.com and you can find out more about that. And if that's a little bit too much, just simply go to beyond50radio.com, the number 50. We do have a free weekly e-newsletter. Check it out. Great links and great resources as well. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program. And remember, live your day past halfway.